Eu gosto de discutir as paradas de terror e, né, vendo como as coisas funcionam, as técnicas que a galera usa. Isso é sempre legal de ver. Por isso que eu tô repetindo e a gente tá comentando tudo, né? Aí tem um vídeo que ele explica, tá? 40 minutos. Espero que vocês curtam tanto quanto eu. Eu curto ele pra caramba. VSauce é um canal ótimo. Quem manja de inglês pode aproveitar muita coisa dele de muitos assuntos diferentes. Ele é muito divertido e ele é muito aprofundado em coisas tão específicas e é muito fascinante a maneira que ele vai explicando. E aí eles fizeram essa série chamada Mindfield. Acho que teve 3 temporadas no total. Antes tinha conteúdo pago, mas agora tá tudo liberado. Mindfield, tipo campo da mente. E aí tem muita coisa de psicologia e comportamento humano. E aí isso daqui é sobre, digamos que a psicologia e fisiologia do medo. E é muito, muito interessante. Então, esse daqui tem legenda, apesar de ser em inglês. Eu acho que nem todo conteúdo do Vsauce tem legenda, mas Mindfield tem. Legenda em português mesmo, vai dar pra gente acompanhar legal e ter umas discussões maneiríssimas. Então, vamos dar uma olhada. E me deem feedback do som também. Não é de susto, exceto em alguns momentinhos bestas.
Everyone is scared of something. But is there something that everyone is scared of? What is the scariest thing possible?
Qual a coisa, em absoluto, mais assustadora? E a produção é muito boa também.
So what is the scariest thing? Is it thunder?
Boletos.
Shadows? Being burned alive? No. It's also not heights or needles, snakes, spiders, sharks. Those things can be scary to some, sure, but not to all. So here's what I mean by scariest. I want a thing, an object, an action, an idea that at my disposal would be guaranteed to elicit fear and panic in anyone who might happen to walk into this room right now, regardless of how old they were, their cultural background, their abilities, or even their neurology. An adventure towards this ultimate terrible thing must necessarily focus on the womb. No, not the kind you came from, but the womb in which fear itself gestates. The mind.
A mente.
To find the scariest thing, we must understand how fears are born.
E aí, reconhecem essa música? E essa estradinha? O que essa estradinha faz pensar?
Where are we going?
A referência é muito
Don't
boa.
worry about it. Only two things matter. One, I've got plenty of gas, so what could go wrong? And two, our destination is a little bit spooky, and we're gonna learn. Because in order to truly grasp what makes the one true
Michael
scary
Myers.
thing, well, we need to dive deeper into how we learn.
O vídeo do susto,
fears.
exatamente. Aquela estradinha é muito o vídeo do susto.
To start out, I commissioned a fear conditioning demonstration on me. You've probably heard that exposure therapy can help people overcome their fears. Well, the same principle.
É legal que o vídeo é super nerd. Eu tô fazendo vocês aprenderem. Por mais que você lute contra isso. Mas. E as referências deles são muito boas. Tudo tem cara de
Can be
filme de terror
used
aqui.
to create fears.
Hello, Michael. I'm
É, a
Dr.
produção
Thomas
ficou cada vez
Falzon
melhor.
from Caltech, and today we're going to do some fear conditioning. Do you have any heart conditions or any serious major medical conditions?
No.
Okay.
You've done this to people before,
Hundreds of times.
and they were all
yes.
okay?
They were all okay. Yeah, everything worked out okay.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay, perfect.
Condicionamento de medo. Condicionamento é basicamente você criar uma resposta a algum estímulo. Isso se faz muito com animais em estudos de memória, de quando você está, por exemplo, estudando fisiologia do cérebro e tal. A galera da psicologia vive fazendo condicionamento. Então você pega algum estímulo que não vai gerar nada a princípio, mas aí você ensina o seu sujeito a ter
The
alguma
protocol
resposta.
for fear conditioning involves my being electrically shocked and startled by the sound of a human scream in connection to visuals I see on a screen. Bioelectric sensors monitor my body's physiological reactions. For example, my perspiration, an indirect measure of fear that you can't consciously control. Is this how you run this at Caltech?
Yes, this is the exact
Exactly the same way.
Yeah.
Ah, good.
Minus the restraints, of course.
Oh,
but
okay.
yeah. Everything else is a solid fear conditioning set.
As your usual.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, I'm game. Let's help science. The goal of this procedure is to condition me to be scared of something I've never feared before. A mundane, harmless, geometric shape. Something normal people don't find threatening at all.
Momentinho de susto, foi mal. Dá o choquinho, dá o som de susto.
A little bit more scared of the square right now. A clear pattern emerges. My senses are being assaulted only when the purple square is on screen. But am I actually being conditioned to fear a purple square?
All right, Michael, you're all done. How was it?
Well, it felt like I was one of Pavlov's dogs. I couldn't help what I was doing, and I was being trained to do it in response to something. And that something was an otherwise very unassuming geometric shape.
Exactly. With Pavlov's dogs, he had a bell and food, something positive at the end. But in fear conditioning, we have something aversive and negative at the end.
And it worked. Once my brain associated the purple square with being shocked, my physiological response to the square went up and stayed up. The mere appearance of a simple geometric shape made me scared enough to break a sweat.
The results show that you physiologically really ramped up to that purple square specifically. You quickly learned to be afraid on a physical level.
Sabe com que isso funciona muito bom, muito bem? Com trilha sonora. Condicionamento auditivo é muito fácil, porque momento nerd de neurociências. Nossos ouvidos recebem o som e aí os nervos mandam essa informação para o cérebro. Tá tudo pertinho, né? Tá tudo na cabeça, mas é separado o cérebro do ouvido. E o caminho que o som faz para a sua área de memória e para a sua área digamos, de medo, para a amígdala, que é uma área do cérebro que responde a emoções fortes, é um caminho muito curtinho. Ele é bem direto, ele não passa primeiro para a área que você processa o som e depois vai para a área da emoção, digamos assim. Você ouviu o som, ele já manda direto para aquela área. Então tem esse caminho direto, esse atalho. Então é muito fácil você lidar com sons e emoções intensas. Não só medo, né? Mas com o medo é mais fácil de fazer experimentos. Então, quando você tem uma trilha sonora relacionada com uma coisa... com alguma cena que gera tensão, ansiedade, algo assim, você está fazendo uma coisa complexíssima, né? Fazendo um filme, ou fazendo um RPG em que você bota sempre a trilha sonora pro vilão, sabe? Ou para momentos em que coisas ruins acontecem, você bota sempre a mesma trilha sonora. Você está fazendo uma atividade muito complexa. Só que você está usando esse atalho neurológico evolutivo para fazer isso. É uma coisa muito
Showed
bacana.
fear.
I came in here today, normal old Michael, but I'm leaving as a brand new Michael who is afraid of purple squares.
The human brain can learn to be afraid of almost anything.
É confortante, né? O cérebro
To
humano
better
pode
understand how
aprender a
this
ter medo de
works,
tudo.
we need to look at what's going on neurologically. What happens in the brain during fear conditioning?
Well, what we know is that over evolution, over millions of years, we've developed these defensive circuits in our brain. And the amygdala sits on the front of the memory systems of the hippocampus. And the amygdala seems to play an important role in determining what the danger is of something in the world. It tells us what we should be remembering, what we should be learning. That is important to survival.
Our brain actually has two amygdalae, one in each hemisphere. The function
As
of the amygdalae
amygdalas.
is at the center of fear research, which covers human behavior ranging from the risk-averse to high-risk takers, like free soloist Alex Honnold. Ancient humans who avoided danger and survived long enough to reproduce became our ancestors. They populated the world with creatures like us, organisms that instinctively avoid and are averse to potentially dangerous sensations. Things like pain and being sick, suffocation, the need to breathe. We don't think those feel good, and you don't have to learn to not like them. Even a newborn is distressed by them, which makes them
Os medos inatos.
innate aversions.
A
Fear
versão é
is
mais
the
precisa.
anticipation of these innate aversions. When the purple square was paired with electric shocks, my amygdala quickly made that association and began consciously and unconsciously arousing fear in me whenever I saw it. For this reason, I want us to think of sensations as flies, and our amygdala as a meaty little spider spinning a web of fear.
Uma teia de medo.
The web is pre-stocked with our innate aversions. Whenever an experience is associated with an innate aversion, it's like a fly landing on the web. This alerts the amygdala spider, which weaves a powerful connection between that experience and the innate aversion it's associated with. In my case, that innate aversion was pain, which probably isn't the scariest thing for everyone because, well, some people have a high pain tolerance. Others can learn to suppress their fear of pain. And of course, some people enjoy pain. But the point is, now, that new experience will stay trapped
Kinky.
in your web of fear, a new member of the library of things that scare you. To find the scariest thing, we must wander through the darkest recesses of the web. Everything caught in your web of fear is somehow connected to death. Avoiding it, surviving, is after all what makes fear useful. It's why we are still here today as a species. So, if death is at the very center of all of our webs of fear, does that make death the scariest thing?
É uma coisa interessante, né, pensar nisso. Pensando a partir do ponto de vista, tipo, evolutivo, a gente só vai temer coisas que atrapalhem a perpetuação dos nossos genes, né? Então, a morte, não só nossa também, como animais sociais, aí a gente teme por outros também, e que é um fator muito importante para nessa empatia, né? Um dos pontos de partida dela. É uma coisa bem bacana.
Well, although many people say death is their number one fear, not everyone is afraid of it. Many acts of courage require caring more about others than your own life. Some older people say they're ready to die. And what about those who commit suicide? Sadly, for them, something else was scarier than ending their own life. So, death isn't exactly the answer we're looking for.
Aqui é legal que ele tá colocando já essas. Tá descrevendo melhor onde que a gente vai chegar. A morte não pode ser a coisa mais assustadora de todas, porque tem gente que se arrisca e que se diverte arriscando. Tem gente que, como idosos, já não temem mais a morte, já vem como uma coisa que simplesmente vai acontecer, aproveita a vida enquanto dá e quando chegar, chegou. Então, para essas pessoas já não é a coisa mais assustadora. Então não pode ser a coisa mais assustadora e universal. Isso é uma
The
busca bem
scariest
interessante
thing
essa.
will be something else on all of our webs that is panic-inducing even to those who want to die.
Ó o carro.
Dang nabbit. Wouldn't you know it? I've run out of gas. Guess I'm just gonna have to walk down this desolate, foreboding road in search of a gas station. Luckily, this is just a movie. My rational mind knows that I'm safe, and it will use that to inhibit my amygdala's fear response. Well, what a great way to make a horror film scarier, right? Take away one of the rational mind's shields, and the amygdala's fear response won't be as inhibited. What we're about to see really could happen.
É engraçado pensar que você pode fazer coisas de ficção em que você fala baseado em fatos reais, mesmo sem ser baseado em fatos reais. É uma coisa bastante peculiar.
And perhaps will. Of course, we don't just learn fears from first-hand experiences. Throughout our history, we have used images.
Pós-ficção. É o. Qual que é? O documentário dos dragões do History Channel. Vocês lembram desse? O das sereias, do macaco aquático também.
And words to teach fears to one another, to prepare the next generation for various dangers.
Calma.
To prepare.
Para de fumar. Eu casei com um comunista! Primeiro, um flerte inocente. Então, amor fingido. Então, calma, o que tem aqui em cima? Então, desgraça. Por fim, assassinato. Esse deve ser um filme bom, hein, gente? Esse deve ser, como dizem por aí, Gimo. Gimo curado.
Prepare the next generation for.
E esse daqui. A Organização Nacional para a Reforma das Leis de Marihuana. A erva do diabo. Colhida do jardim do diabo. Não deem pro bebê diabo.
For various dangers.
Um momento de prazer. Uma vida inteira de arrependimento. Em busca de emoções, inalaram um sopro de pecado concentrado. Reefer Madness? Que seria isso? Reefer, será que tipo de reef, de coral? É a loucura do surfista? É assim que os jovens chamam hoje em dia? É o barato do surfista.
These high school boys and girls are having a hop at the local soda fountain, innocent of a new and deadly menace lurking behind closed doors. Marijuana, burning weed with its roots in hell.
Cigarrinho do capeta.
Why do humans
Calma.
have
Burning weed with its closed doors. Marijuana, the burning weed with its roots in hell.
Why do humans
Suas
have to
raízes
tell
no inferno.
stories to share fears?
Ah, Reefer é... Ok, Reefer é baseado, então. Ok.
From generation to generation and person to person.
Language is virtual reality. So when you tell someone a story, you're not just describing, a crocodile, for example. The language in the story has a kind of emotional impact on the listener. So when I tell you some scary story about crocodiles, the amygdala is being activated by the words and the scenarios, allowing the imagination to sort of play with these ideas and scenarios. So you're concocting imagery. So it has a double whammy, and you're getting a very good sense that you should stay away from this kind of thing in the future. As a species, we're very dependent and vulnerable compared to other animals. We don't have sharp teeth and, big claws, and we're not very fast. It takes us years and years to be self-sufficient. So what's happening during those years of development is that we're getting all this information about the environment through stories. And part of that is to know what to be afraid of and what to not be afraid of.
Hello! Hey, hello! Ooh, okay,
Som
being
de
alone is
águia.
kind of scary, right? Oh, but you know what? I'm actually not alone. I am always connected. No reception, of course. I mean, what is this, a horror movie? Yes, it is. And you know what? I'm actually getting a little bit scared right now. A new fear, by the way, has developed in just the last few decades. You see,
Vocês já pararam pra pensar que esse efeito sonorinho de tan é uma coisa que a gente meio que faz na vida real? A gente leva susto, a gente grita, a gente vê algo preocupante e faz... Sabe? É o respirada funda. É uma coisa muito inata. O passarinho cantando alto quando tá chegando o predador. É a gente faz
a
isso.
while ago, no one had a cell phone. No one was ever connected through the internet constantly. But now, many of us, most of us are. And so that's the new normal. And what's abnormal now is not being connected, not having your phone. Psychologists give that fear a name. It's a real thing that's being studied, and it's called nomophobia. Anyway, the point is, the scariest thing
Nomophobia.
possible. What could it be? Well, an important ingredient might be our innate aversion to isolation. Why are we afraid of being alone?
Human beings are social animals. We need each other to survive. So if we're alone, it lessens our chances of survival. And there's been a lot of research now that shows that when people isolate socially, it actually leads to things like increased heart problems, increased cancer risks, physical issues.
E aí, vocês já estão pensando em alguma coisa que seria a coisa mais assustadora de todas? Você já tem alguma ideia? Algo que vai ser universal, que vai ser absolutamente capaz de gerar pânico em qualquer ser humano, em qualquer momento da vida, em qualquer condição?
Mortality.
Esse é o desafio desse vídeo.
Very much directly tied to the sense of survival and avoidance of death.
What I find interesting about isolation is I think it helps us capture a lot of tertiary and beyond fears that don't seem to be directly connected to death, but are in a way through isolation. For instance, the fear of public speaking.
Yes, well, that taps into your fear of rejection. And when you feel like people don't like you, you feel alone. And so putting yourself out there, having that possible fear of rejection when you're speaking in public and not knowing how people are going to perceive you, that's very scary for a lot of people.
Which doesn't necessarily mean that you will directly die. However, it connects to our innate aversion to isolation, which
Isso é uma interpretação muito
we have learned
interessante.
is a bad thing that can lead to death. And so we're afraid of it, avoid it.
Absolutely.
In the very first episode of Mindfield, I spent 72 hours in an isolation chamber. For 3 days, I had no contact with the outside world. I had no clock or window,
Esse
and
episódio
the
é
lights
bacana.
never went out. The scariest part, though, wasn't being alone. I could handle that. The worst part was being separated from the natural cycles of the earth I was so
Ele
accustomed
tem um boneco
to.
creepy atrás dele.
Night and day, time. The disorientation and helplessness caused by that made me distressed and may have been a reason why, while in the room, all of my dreams also took place in the same room. I soon became unable to tell the difference between when I was dreaming and when I was awake. I was terrified.
Isso é assustador.
Extreme isolation like that
E aí,
is not
Manfredo?
normal or healthy, but we all respond differently. There are people who love living by themselves in the middle.
Tá atacando sua claustrofobia só de pensar? Ah, esse daqui
I
do...
soon became unable to tell the difference between when I was dreaming and when I was awake. I was
Isso é
terrified.
foda.
Extreme isolation like that is not normal or healthy, but we all respond differently. There are people who love living by themselves in the middle of nowhere. And with sufficient forewarning of the effects, I think I could have handled it better. So just being all alone probably isn't the scariest thing. So then, what is? Oh, you know what would make this scarier? Perfect.
The Dark.
Let's talk about fear of the dark. Children and adults and myself often don't like the dark.
No.
Okay? Why?
The sensory deprivation. It leads you to feel like you're out of control, like you don't know what's going to be happening. And at the same time, predators tend to come out at you.
Deixa
You don't know
eu...
what-
Todos os medos, de alguma forma, estão conectados por motivos evolutivos à morte. Aí tem digamos que as aversões inatas, isolamento, dor, aqui tá o desconhecido ou anormal. E outras coisas que aí, dependendo do contexto, se relacionam com as coisas inatas. Então, escuro estaria relacionado com o anormal.
What's going to be happening. And at the same time, predators tend to come out at night. So when we think back to caveman days, they tend to attack later on in the day when you can't see them. And so there's a natural inclination for us to fear the dark because we don't know what's lurking out there. And there's a lot of things that could come and hurt us.
My wife is pregnant right now. I mean, it's pretty dark inside my wife. Is my kid scared of the dark in there?
Nope.
Why?
Nope.
Isso é
It's
uma frase
comforting.
muito curiosa. É muito escuro dentro da minha esposa.
For them. And in fact, if a baby is colicky, they can't be soothed. If you put them in a dark room, they calm down. In fact, this fear of darkness doesn't really come out for most children until about the age of 2. That's when I think they start to develop certain cognitive and neural memories and maps about things that might be scary about the dark. For example, your parents tend not to be in bed with you necessarily. They're gone. So these
Michael
people
é
who are
muito
protecting
esquisito.
you, well, it's dark, you're
Ele é
going to
ótimo,
bed,
ele é
and they
muito
go to their
bom.
room and you're by yourself.
Right. Okay, so to answer the question, like, what's
Michael, ele, no caso.
the scariest thing possible?
Mm-hmm.
The darkness isn't necessarily the best one, because if a newborn walked in, well, I don't know how they're walking, but just go with me. A newborn walks in,
Yeah.
it's not going to be like, it's dark. They'll just be like,
Right. It's kind of nice. And you know who else isn't scared of the dark? A blind person.
exactly.
Yeah.
So darkness, I'm crossing that off my list.
Not universal.
Tá aí o desafio, então. Ó, Manfredo, qual que você acha que é o medo universal? A coisa mais assustadora? Pegaria qualquer um.
So, if messing with our sense of sight isn't scary enough, what about our sense of hearing?
Okay, I'm pretty scared right now, but I could be more scared. Why is
Esse
it so
tanto de som.
easy to condition a fear using sound?
Sound has a specific neural pathway in the brain, which goes from the auditory cortex, thalamus, straight into the amygdala. Now, the funny thing about sound is our visual system allows us to see a threat and prepare for it. But sounds don't.
Dei spoiler
The
pra
rustle of
vocês.
some leaves, the footsteps in the distance evokes anxiety. It evokes a situation in which we don't know how to respond because we've not seen the threat yet. We don't know what it is.
Much less information.
Yes.
Sound is a very immediate processing within the brain. So a loud sound creates a startle for anybody immediately. But also some of these eerie sounds that you'll
Isso é muito
hear, they
sacanagem.
make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. It's basically hijacking your fear system very directly.
The first time I heard the from the Friday the 13th movies, that stuck with me forever.
Music tells you how you're supposed to feel. And I believe that we are
Cena em
hardwired to
câmera
respond
lenta.
to music. In dramatic musical writing, you can use all kinds of different devices to create fear.
Here I am walking through the woods. And here I am walking through the woods with scary music.
A ambientação dos primeiros Sexta-feira 13 são muito bons. Ô, Sexta-feira 13 é um que eu não assisti. Sabia? Eu tenho que ver.
But if one note is scary, two notes can be even scarier, especially if they're dissonant.
There are certain intervals, two notes that are clashing with each other, that universally bother people. They put you in a kind of, almost like a fight or flight situation.
Musical intervals that fall outside of conventional harmonies may trigger
Maldição
our
de
innate
mosca agora.
aversion to things that are different or abnormal. This interval, known as the devil's tritone, is so dissonant that composers purposefully use it to make listeners uncomfortable, from TV themes like The Twilight Zone.
A música do Twilight Zone é muito boa. Que bom que eles decidiram nunca trocar nenhum remake, porque continua sendo muito boa.
To hard rock, like the start of Jimi Hendrix's Purple Haze. But music doesn't always have to start out scary. The right context can make even the happiest song absolutely terrifying.
Criancinha contente.
Once a song has been conditioned to elicit fear, the effect can be extremely strong and long-lasting. For example, the theme song from The Exorcist, Tubular Bells. Terrifying, right? Go listen to it, it's scary. But just a few months before the movie came out, it was a chart-topping pop hit that audiences loved because it was lighthearted and fun. Oh, Strawberry. Very good. But here's the problem with sound. Not everyone has been conditioned to be afraid of the same sounds or music, and not everyone can hear. What about the deaf? Clearly, the scariest thing possible to everyone will not be a sound. Take a look at these paintings. We have a flirty little clown, an abstract
Acho que é algo que sempre vai ser assustador ou perturbador. São coisas fora do lugar.
piece, and a landscape.
Talvez isso caia naquela versão inata do desconhecido ou do anormal, né?
Now, these paintings may seem a little bit strange, but I wouldn't say I'm freaked out by them, and I doubt you would either. But now, let me give you a bit more story. The context behind these items. This picture was painted by John Wayne Gacy, a serial killer who tortured, raped, and killed 33 teenage boys and young men. This was painted by Charles Manson, the infamous cult leader who convinced his followers to commit a series of 9 horrific murders in Los Angeles. And this landscape was painted by Adolf Hitler. Your thoughts about these items have probably changed a bit. Psychologists call this phenomenon the law of contagion. It's our tendency to imbue objects with the qualities of the people they're associated with. Now, before and after you heard the story, the items were still made of the same molecules and atoms, but our minds use context to quickly endow them with new powers. Now, these paintings.
Você falou aí, tipo a criança que brinca sozinha no meio da rua à noite vai ser perturbadora ou assustadora. Mas aí, olha, não vai ser anormal pra, como ele já deu o exemplo de um bebê que não tá condicionado a saber que essas coisas são anormais. Ou é, sabe, algo fora do lugar para quem está vendo, não é anormal para quem não enxerga. Da mesma forma que um som anormal não vai ser assustador para quem não escuta.
Paintings cannot hurt you, but the fact that the context allows your amygdala spider to connect them to other fears and ultimately, through your innate aversions to death, means they take on a whole new meaning. The right story and context can make almost any object, person, or place scary. In fact, let me ask you a question. What is this behind me? You know what? This old camper isn't actually that scary. Nuts. All right.
Prepare to die.
Things are different now, and I'm starting to feel, yep, an automatic process is already happening in my body. My amygdala now associates this trailer with death and danger.
What I'm feeling is actually the same thing that happens when you feel frisson. That's when you're greatly moved by something profound. What's happening is that my amygdala is telling my hypothalamus to tell my adrenal glands to start pumping adrenaline into my bloodstream. This makes my erector pili muscles contract, which makes my hairs stand up. Now, if my body were covered in thick fur, like, say, a cat, this would make me look bigger and more threatening. But of course, a long, long time ago, we humans lost a lot of our fur. But we didn't lose this reflex, which makes it a
Nude, do
vestigial
nada.
reflex. Something we don't need anymore, but we
Esse é o medo real, né? De no meio da live na Twitch aparecer
It is
barbudo
known
peladão.
as the
É isso.
piloerection reflex, or more commonly, goosebumps.
Goosebumps.
Anything that's different or abnormal can be scary.
Take it, Georgie.
Like Pennywise in It, oftentimes the scariest type of predator isn't a human, a creature, or a beast. It's a variation of a human being.
Ó, Beducci tá falando direto com você aqui.
A distorted human form that looks, acts, or even moves in a disturbingly unnatural
O que a gente tava falando quando tava vendo os curtas? É o contorcionista. O medo universal ao contorcionista.
way.
One thing many of us are terrified by is a distorted human form. Why?
Our brain and our mind is a kind of prediction processor. We're trying to predict what's going to happen next. So when anything comes in and it doesn't match our template, our sense of categories, then we're cognitively and emotionally aroused. So it activates the amygdala, it makes us a little suspicious, or at least puts us on our toes again.
Por isso que o povo tem medo de palhaço circo, sim.
Predisposition to be averse to, or at least aroused by, that which is outside the ordinary. But when you're fresh out of the womb, you don't know what's normal or what's distorted and scary. Researchers at Princeton and Florida Atlantic University demonstrated this by showing normal faces and creepy, distorted faces to babies. Children that were at least 1 year old avoided looking at the scary faces, which makes sense. But younger children, like those who were only 8 months old, didn't. The hypothesis is that at that age, normal hasn't yet been sufficiently established. A creepy face is just another thing to look at. It only becomes creepy when you've been around long enough to know what's not creepy. So, when it comes to finding the one thing that can panic anyone, I'll need to look elsewhere. Because if a newborn baby rolls in here, I won't be able to scare it even with the most vile, scary, unnatural face.
Aterrorizante, gente. Vocês estão com medo? Com esse som de balão enchendo.
Of course, it's not just faces. Distorted natural forms also include bodies, like humans with other animal parts. Or creatures moving unnaturally.
Esses efeitos especiais de milhões.
Oh my. Ooh. Oh my indeed. Wow. You know what's going on here? This is the third origin. Fears can be born through firsthand experiences, like feeling pain, or informationally through stories. But we can also learn fear vicariously by watching others experience fear.
It's called social fear transmission, and we tried it out during my fear conditioning demonstration. Our unknowing subject was my good friend, Allie Ward. Allie was invited to observe my experience and witness my reactions.
Jeez. Okay, a little bit more scared of the
Isso é
square
bacana.
right now.
Right
Esse
after my
vídeo me
test,
dá medo
it
do
was her
trabalho que
turn
deve
to
ter
face
sido pra
the green
produzir.
circle and the purple square that appeared whenever I got shocked.
We're going to use the same shock intensity that Michael had.
Okay.
Except that wasn't true. Allie's test would not include any shocks or startling sounds.
Is it normal to be shaking before this?
I mean, yeah, it's an anxiety-provoking task. Are you feeling okay about doing it?
Sure.
Okay, all right.
Would Allie be afraid of the purple square just from observing my fear of it?
You ready, Allie? All righty, here we go.
Ela parece estar tão tranquila, dá pra perceber, né? Nem a voz saindo.
I feel like I'm gonna barf.
Allie already seems scared. But is she just afraid in general, or is she more afraid of the purple square? Which shape is making her sweat the most?
That's it?
You're all done.
The shock fairy did not come to visit me.
A fada do choque.
So much adrenaline for no pain. My hands are sweating so much that the dye on my pants is like on my hands now.
So, which shape scared Allie more? Despite receiving no adverse stimuli, but after observing my fear, she had a higher physiological response to the purple square than the green circle.
You were definitely more afraid of that purple square throughout the experiment.
Ah, you know, I'm not a gambler, but I think I was thinking I haven't gotten a shock yet. It's coming.
People are always saying that they learn from me, but it's usually, math or science or facts in general. You learned fear.
I still hate that purple square.
You're welcome. Let's organize what we've learned so far. Fear is a feeling that we learn to have in response to things our amygdala figures we would do best to avoid, because in one way or another, they could lead to our demise. Strands of fear silk have connected them in some way to possible death. Now, from talking with experts, in my estimation, there are 8 unique innate aversions selected to engender panic in us by evolution over millions of years. They come pre-learned in our DNA and include pain, isolation, the unknown or abnormal, disease, sudden movement, suffocation, falling, and incapacitation. These form the inner ring of the web of fear. All our fears, from rats to radiation, are based on connections made by our amygdalae to death through one or more of these innate aversions. When it comes to learned fears, there may be no limit to the number we can acquire.
Isso me faz pensar um pouco em Magnus Archives, não sei se vocês conhecem. Isso é lore de um pouco mais pra frente de Magnus Archives, mas tem ele fala das categorias do medo. Vamos ver o que tem aqui. Areia movediça, leva para espaços confinados, sufocamento. Água, também sufocamento. Tudo isso conectado com dor aqui. Opa. O anormal, dissonância. Palhaços, o escuro. Magnus Archives é um podcast. Ele tem um RPG, inclusive, que tá. Acho que ele foi financiado recentemente. Que vai ser lançado. Ele é um audiodrama de uma organização chamada Magnus Archives, que coleta histórias, relatos sobrenaturais das pessoas. Então eles têm os arquivistas, e aí o episódio inteiro é o arquivista lendo o relato das pessoas para registrar no arquivo. E aí com o tempo, ele é um podcast assim bem slow burn, ele é bem lento. Então você começa só com os relatos. Relatos já são bem bacanas, é historinha de terror, né? Mas aí começa a ser as interações do arquivista comentando aquilo, e aí outras pessoas do arquivo interagindo com ele e tal. E aí ele vai te apresentando o sobrenatural ali desse universo mais intensamente. Ele é bem bacana. É muito legal. E muito bem produzido. A galera do Rusty Quill, que eu acho que eles são a galera do Old Gods of Appalachia agora. A carinha do jacaré aqui no canto, sim. Radiação, germes, doença, capacitação de estar enterrado vivo. Ah, isso também, né? Sufocamento. Drogas, raio. Igual.
To learned fears, there may be no limit to the number we can acquire. As long as your amygdala keeps spinning its threads, the web can extend forever. But here's what's even cooler. When our learned fears are combined just right, they can be scarier than the sum of their parts. Researchers have found that if you've been conditioned to fear two separate stimuli, say a purple square and a green circle, seeing them suddenly together makes you expect a worse outcome than seeing either stimulus individually. Horror filmmakers take advantage of this phenomenon by employing a technique called category jamming, mashing several categories of fears together to create the scariest villains possible.
There's people like Freddy Krueger, where you've got many things
Olha o
that
galã aí.
indicate death and fear, like, you know, the mottled flesh of the skin, the burn. He's a ghost. His hands are blades of some kind. So you're weaving together a number of very fearful associations that most people have.
And his criminal past.
Right, all that together, exactly. If you look at sort of the Alien franchise,
Que me lembra, amanhã a gente tem gameplay de Alien Isolation. Vocês vão me ver me cagando aqui, que eu já larguei esse jogo uma vez, mas vou voltar só pra live.
you'll see that the face hugger that grabs onto your face is a beautiful hybrid of a spider and a snake. Those are two things that are universally feared, and so this is a kind of category jamming. It doesn't fit in our categories. The designers have basically put them together, so the fear is...
Vai deixar até no despertador, é sacanagem. Eu não vou colocar negocinho pra gastar ponto e dar som de susto. Nem a pau. Nem a pau. Não vai. Já fiz.
Another example could be just taking something that ordinarily would never be here and putting it there. If you put snakes on a plane, you've got something most people are afraid of, snakes. You've got flying, which people are afraid of. You've also got strange domain crossing. Why would snakes be on a plane? That doesn't make sense, and that's unsettling in and of itself. So you're weaving together a number of very fearful associations that most people have, and that's uniquely disturbing, I think.
Aí... É legal pensar nessas coisas, né? De como mistura. A gente estava falando bastante disso ontem na live, quando estávamos vendo categorias de terror e tal. Você pega qualquer filme de terror, qualquer coisa assim, você tem essas misturas. Você pega o clássico zumbi, né? Você pode pegar medo de doença junto com dor, o medo do isolamento, de você estar sozinho em um lugar. Aí você junta uma cena ali que tá escuro, que tem barulhos súbitos e altos, e essa desconfiança do que pode ser. É legal ir montando os bloquinhos, ou enxergando os bloquinhos das coisas.
So maybe extreme category jamming, combining every innate aversion and conditioned fear could be the scariest thing.
Falando sobre ontem, onde eu vejo aquele artigo que eu tava... Ah, tá. Eu vou mandar depois. Eu vou anotar aqui. Depois eu mando. Quando a gente terminar aqui, me pergunte de novo.
Certainly be likely to catch anyone in a web of fear. Let's try it out. Now, conveniently, I'm already in a graveyard. So we already have the fear of death.
Ah, não. Grumpy Cat. Harambe. Não pode ser. Not captive anymore. Está com Deus. Vocês podem ver uma ausência forte ali. Hoje em dia, se o vídeo for atualizado, a gente vai ter o Olavo de Carvalho ali também. A não ser que ele tenha sido enterrado fora de terreno consagrado.
It's dark. I'm alone.
Never forget
Let's add
Harambe.
in some scary sounds. A distorted human form. Sudden movement. A mortal threat. Gore.
A Bebeta.
Story and context. incapacitation. Is this it? Is the scariest thing possible just a combination of every innate aversion?
Olha o plot twist. Estão preparados?
Oh, dear Michael.
Oh, meu Deus.
Conditioned fears know no bounds. So, the scariest thing is that the human mind can be made afraid of anything. Hey, hold it. Both of you, stop. Just, let's take a step back. Category jamming together.
Vocês estavam distraídos? Vocês se perderam aqui? A coisa mais terrível é que você pode se assustar com qualquer coisa? Será que é isso?
Every possible learned fear and every innate aversion just sounds like a cop-out. I don't like that. I want to be more specific. But this idea that the scariest thing is the fact that the human mind can be made afraid of anything, I don't like that either. I mean, it might be the scariest thing possible, but it also might not. What about people who don't have an amygdala? Meet patient SM. Not the snake, the hands. This is all we are allowed to show you.
Not the
Her
snake.
amygdala was destroyed at the age of 10 due to an incredibly rare genetic disorder.
Acho que a maior prova disso é a gente que tem medo de combinação de número. Tipo, gente que primeiro faz 23 anos, depois faz 23 mais 1 na velhinha do bolo, assim. Essas pessoas. Gente que tem medo de letra. Tem muita gente com medo da letra L, ultimamente. Não sei se vocês viram.
And because she doesn't have an amygdala, she cannot learn to register experiences as threats, which puts her life in danger. And that's why we can't reveal her identity.
Patient SM's feelings, the feeling states, the subjective states seem to be absent.
Vocês já ouviram falar das pessoas que não têm medo, né? Eu não lembro o nome da condição. Isso me lembrou uma condição praticamente reversa. Pessoas que se assustam repetidamente com a mesma coisa, com aviso prévio, elas se assustam. Tipo, movimento súbito, som alto, isso assusta elas recorrentemente. É tipo, sabe, se alguém do nada bate palma do lado da sua cara, você leva um sustão. Mas eu estudei com uma moça que tinha essa condição. Infelizmente eu não lembro disso, não lembro o nome disso, mas era tipo, eu vou bater palma na sua frente. Você faz isso, ela tem a reação de medo igualzinho. Bastante desconfortável, eu imagino, para ela.
In patient SM. For example, when she was walking through a park one night, a guy came up to her and put a knife to her throat saying, "Give me your money." And she just kind of ignored them and said, "Well, if you cut me, I'll chase you down and kill you," or something like that.
It was just all rational.
Yeah. And she apparently kind of knows that this
Ter medo de
isn't
não
right,
ter medo.
but she reacts in a different way.
Researchers have even purposefully exposed her to classically scary things like spiders and snakes and haunted houses and horror films, and she has exhibited no fear response to any of them whatsoever.
Galera, estamos chegando. Últimos momentos de vocês chutarem. Qual é a coisa mais assustadora? Façam suas apostas.
For a long time, scientists considered SM living proof that without an amygdala, we are unable to feel fear. But then, one experiment changed everything. Scientists have known for decades that a lack of oxygen will make you feel dizzy and maybe even euphoric before you pass out. But elevated levels of carbon dioxide in the blood induce fear, anxiety, and panic. Patient SM volunteered to inhale concentrated CO2. Her brain interpreted the elevated levels of CO2 in her blood as proof that she was suffocating, a process we are innately averse to. As usual, the researchers expected SM to feel no fear, but for the first time in her adult life, she felt sheer and utter panic.
The great thing about that study on SM is really it was the first time that we showed that these emotional responses can occur without an amygdala.
Over the course of the next year, the scientists tracked down 2 rare patients in Germany who also had non-functioning amygdalae and gave them the same CO2 inhalation test. They had the same panic response. Researchers believe that the fight or flight responses they observed in these amygdala-damaged patients were induced by CO2 sensing neurons in evolutionarily older regions of the brain, like the midbrain or even the brain stem, which control more primal physiological functions. And so, if I want to terrify even the neurologically unscarable, I need our body's internal fear response to elevated carbon dioxide levels in the blood. But the story
Mais
doesn't end there.
primal.
SM's researchers later discovered something even weirder. When a control group of people with functioning amygdalae inhaled CO2, they showed a lower fear reaction than patient SM. Why?
Metodologia científica linda de se ver, né? Botaram medo em quem não sabia ter a capacidade de ter medo. Sim, é muito legal.
Well, this question led to a potentially revolutionary rethinking of the amygdala's role in fear. Researchers still believe that the amygdala learns to detect threats that are outside the body so that the body can respond to them. But when it comes to internal threats, it may actually inhibit your fear response. The control subjects knew they were
Jacaré,
participating
é
in a
esse,
safe,
é o segredo.
voluntary experiment. So their amygdalae may have effectively told other parts of their brain, hey, relax, okay, things are bad in the body, but I don't detect a real external threat, so like, calm down, a panic response isn't gonna help, not warranted. So, if you want to ensure the utmost amount of panic in the most people, you don't need to category jam every possible scary and unpleasant thing together. You only need 2 of them. Increase a person's blood CO2 levels and present an external threat they'll believe is causing it. Drowning, waterboarding, coerced CO2 inhalation. They're all variations of the one true scariest thing. Elevation of carbon dioxide in the blood caused by an uncontrollable external threat.
Dun, dun, dun.
Sweet dreams. And as always, thanks for watching.
E aí, o que vocês acharam? A verdadeira fonte original do medo. Sufocamento. É bastante específico, né? Mas é algo que é garantido de causar medo em qualquer ser humano, em qualquer condição, em qualquer faixa etária, em qualquer contexto, em qualquer estado neurológico, como ele falou. Tem gente que tem kink disso. Então, mas e aí se não tiver... Se você não tiver no controle, sabe? Se a safe word não funciona. Aí ferrou. Aí não vale. Deve ser relacionado ao medo. Mas é o medo de montanha-russa, né? É o medo que você está se expondo em condição controlada. É o medo de filme de terror. É o medo de... Isso não vai te provocar mal de verdade. Por isso que... Cadê? Vamos voltar.
An uncontrollable external threat.
É causado, você tem que ter a percepção do que está causando, por uma fonte externa incontrolável. Então, tá aí. Se você não tá no controle. E se tá combinado, então não vale. Acho que isso daqui tira a parte da subjetividade, né? A fonte externa é incontrolável. Ministério da Saúde adverte, muito CO2 no sangue dá cagaço. Exatamente. Por isso que eu vou jogar Alien Isolation com... O que pode ser? Com uma máscara de CO2. Não, tô brincando. Enfim. Tem esse plot twist no final, né? Nada que a gente espera. Vai o vídeo inteiro falando de coisas complexas que podem gerar medo. E coisas cheias de contexto. E coisas que fazem muito sentido, né? Nossa, tudo isso gera medo. Dependendo do contexto, gera mais ou menos. Mas aí chega lá no final. Dióxido de carbono. As pessoas têm medo de química no final, né? É isso. Eu tenho medo de química. Prova de química. Enfim. Mindfield. Recomendo muito. Se vocês gostam de documentário, coisa interessante. Mindfield é muito legal. Tem tudo de graça no YouTube. Tudo com esse nível de produção. Tem episódios mais curtos. Isso daqui deve ser um dos mais longos, 40 minutos. Olha aqui. Experimento de Stanford. Muito interessante também. Eu tinha medo de química. Quem não tem? Mas, enfim. VSauce é um canal muito legal. Mindfield é bem bacana. Legal que tem legenda. Importantíssimo. Eu vou ficando por aqui. Então, até mais. E obrigado pelos peixes.